Good morning. There we go. That voice comes up. I love the sound of that voice. I don't know about you. I have to echo what Scott said. Yesterday was an incredibly inspirational morning. And it was all about why. I'm a technology analyst, as you heard. I spend my time looking at markets and understanding what vendors are doing and what their strategies are doing and what's selling and what's not and how it's being sold and whether it's being sold. I don't spend a lot of time on the why. I used to. But these days, we have to talk about the how, and that's what today is about. And we're going to talk a great deal about what the early adopters of AI, who are already out there being successful, are doing in order to get over that first stage of, well, as C.T. Lin put it yesterday, this is a bright, shiny object. Let's go play with it and see what it can do. If that's your strategy, it's the wrong strategy. Right? You need an objective. You need a reason why you're going to use this technology, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. You heard yesterday just how much of a frenzy there is to get it done. We're all here to talk about it, and I've been at 5 conferences in the last 7 weeks, and everybody wants to talk about how AI is going to fit into their product strategy and why they're the right ones to talk to. The pressure is coming down from the top. The data you see behind me now is from a study that my partners at BARC did late last year, where they talked to 135 boards of directors. It's boards who are asking, and yes, they are subject to bright, shiny object syndrome. They're talking about, here's some money. Go do something useful with it, okay? We'll let you figure out what that's going to be. That's not a very helpful set of directions. So it's useful to figure out where we go from there. Right now, all the news, you saw a lot of magazine covers yesterday and some of the keynotes. All the news is about who's spending, who's investing. Here's a whole pile of quotes here. There is actually only one quote on this screen, it's all the way over on this slide, that actually talks about what might happen from all this investment. And it's a very, very stirring, exciting idea from Goldman that says, we might be able to increase productivity by 1% in the next decade. I hope that's not the limit of our ambition. That's kind of a punditry approach to this, and frankly, it's not even that good a headline, and I don't mean to bash Goldman, they do great work. But we need to think about why we're doing this. Dr. Butte yesterday said, we get the data leads to a dashboard, the dashboard leads to a discussion, and there's a step right after that. The discussion leads to action, right? We need to be outcome focused. That's what we really want to get to here. And it's not just a market story that I want to talk about. It's not just about how do we get the data, although that's vitally important, as Scott just pointed out. It's not just about a market share game, although as an IT analyst, it's what I spend my time on. But for this discussion, it's absolutely critical that we understand how central trust is to all of this. Especially, I don't usually get to speak at a healthcare-oriented conference, but you guys deal with life and death. I talk to marketing people, and it's like, do we get more eyeballs or not? This is a little bit more important than that. We have to get this right. And Scott and I chatted briefly this morning about the moment when you're raising children and they're going through their early math classes, and you sit them down and you explain, okay, so you've got long division down. You don't need to show your work anymore. And those are words to live by. We spend much of our adult life thinking we don't need to show our work anymore. Guess what? We're flipping it. We're going to have to show our work now. We're going to have to be able to explain where these conclusions, where these actions that we're driving people to come from. Auditability and transparency are going to be absolutely critical. So, major point 1, don't worry about FOMO. Everybody know FOMO? Fear of missing out. There is a frenzy. Everybody wants to know whether we've gotten there yet. There's plenty of time. There's plenty of time to stop and do it right. And you just heard readiness as a theme. What I want to spend a little time on today is talking about where does readiness manifest itself and how do you get yourself ready? How ready are you already? It may turn out that you're farther along than you think. You want a strategy that has been de-risked. We'd like to move fast, And there is a cavalier attitude, especially among people who give other people money, venture capital type people. They love this idea of failing fast. They have some skin in the game, but the outcome is not as much of an issue for them as long as they get their money back. You want a strategy that's de-risked. It matters to you. It's got to be right. And the way to get there is with a clear, cogent strategy, with clear outcomes, measurable milestones, a definition of success, and trusted partners and technologies that you know you can rely on. So the train hasn't left the station. Keep calm and carry on is the first message of this presentation. So I'm a data guy. Many of you are data guys and gals too. I like to work from real data, and I have to say, having been to all those conferences for the last couple of weeks, more than a couple, I heard a lot of really interesting stuff from a lot of presentation stages based on data that was a year or two old. This is moving very fast, and we need data that's current. We need to know what's going on now. I'm happy to say that my partners at BARC and I just completed a survey that I'm going to give you a little bit of data from. We talked to 335 organizations in February. So this is this year's data. It's pretty new. And we talked to organizations across a large number of vertical industries. Healthcare is right in the middle of that picture, by the way. Not surprisingly, because we were talking to the kind of people who talk to research firms about IT. There's a lot of IT companies in there. That's okay. They're early adopters of a lot of the technologies themselves, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But we tried to give a really good selection of different kinds of industries in different geographies. There was a wonderful presentation yesterday about bias in data selection, bias in data interpretation, interpretation of bias data, 3 separate topics, very, very cogent. And a lot of people think that much market research is almost the very definition of the classic logical error of we go and find what we're looking for and then we tell people about it, right? Many surveys, many use cases are designed to showcase what we already wanted to say. We really went for pure research here. We wanted to know what people were actually doing. And we went across companies of all sizes because if anything happens out of this AI revolution and its transformation into products that we can actually use, it's going to be an equalizer between the huge companies and the small companies. Once these tools become available, it will level the playing field for smaller organizations who can use the same tools that the large ones use. And often the tools will do a great deal of the work for them, and they won't need to have a massive army of highly sophisticated engineers. So it's interesting to see how they're looking at these particular issues that we surveyed them about. And in this first study, we did not see a large disparity in the answers to the questions we got between the largest companies and the smallest ones. We do crosstabs, and we try to figure out what we're going to learn. Some things are more instructive than others, and I'll tell you about a big one in a minute. In fact, why not start now? We looked at several dimensions of the problem. As you put your plan together, you need to think about what are your standards for security and compliance? What are your data access and use? I'm not going to do all of these or we'd be here all day. What are your data access and use policies? What are your enterprise architecture requirements? What are these things in your organization? How do you feel you're doing? And we asked them across all those things about what we perceive as their maturity in these issues. So the little black boxes, the tiny ones over there at the left, those are people who haven't even begun. Maybe FOMO is a good idea for them. But for the rest of us, we've got people who are saying, well, it's not really yet under discussion. We've got people who are saying we are consulting our stakeholders. We've got people who say we got a draft. We're underway drafting our policies. And then over here on the right, I like to call it golden. It's more kind of an orange, I think, but you never know how it's going to project until you get in the room. These are the people who say we are already in production or we're in prototype for these issues. We have standards defined. We are implementing them. We are hiring the people. We're defining the policies. That's a pretty good place to be. And the good news is that for most of these issues, more than half of them are already there. one of the more interesting things for me coming out of this was walking before you have a plan. Turns out to be a little bit more prevalent than I thought. The bottom one on this chart, I'll get out of the way for those of you here on this side of the stage. Project governance oversight came in last in terms of readiness. I don't know about you, one would think you'd sort of have that part in place before you start with the project, but evidently it's not as widespread as I thought. Well, we took this one more step. Once we got to see this data, we realized that we might have something, you'll pardon the expression, golden, in our hands, because when we looked in detail on a second pass through the data, what we discovered was 20% of the respondents actually came up in the high readiness category, meaning across all 7 of those dimensions. They were already in production or already had their plans in place. And we realized that they would be a very interesting set of people to contrast with the whole study. So we went back and did another pass through the data and used them as a cross-tab filter. Learned a few interesting things. One of the first questions we asked them is, what are you doing with your architecture? What are the pieces of technology, hardware, software, that you need to have in place? Where are you with your hardware? Where are you with your model ops? A lot of people didn't even know what model ops was last year, but by February, it was the largest response that we got. That's good news. People understand, fortunately, that once you build a model and once you train it, you've just gotten started. We heard that several times yesterday. Maintenance, update, the world moves, the market changes, your model has to change with it. What's your plan? The plan doesn't end with the first deployment of the model. The plan begins with the first deployment of the model. And we asked him about compliance, and we asked him about data fabrics, and we asked him about something that Scott mentioned a moment ago, vector databases. Readiness is pretty low here. A lot of people still aren't sure. The first thing I said when I heard about vector databases was, that's not a market, that's a feature. I know the folks at Pinecone would disagree with me, but most of the organizations that you use as suppliers for data management technology have vector database capabilities as part of their stack. This may be a very good candidate for your bright, shiny object assessment. Do I need to go out and get another vendor with a new product for this, or does one of my trusted suppliers already provide that capability? Okay, so having looked at the general population, we went back and said, how do those high readiness people answer the same question? And as you can see, the cohort gap is quite significant. The folks who have gotten started are much, much farther along. It's not surprising. You have to make these decisions in order to get started. The ranking is almost the same. There are a couple of little differences, but on a survey size of this couple of hundred, 1 or 2 percentage points doesn't really make all that much difference. So I won't dwell on it. If you read the full report, you'll see a few comments on a couple of little subtle things, but I don't think it's worth our time here. We went back and said, okay, so you've thought through those issues. What challenges you? What do you perceive, or what have you already experienced as the blockers? If you've ever watched a presentation about almost anything in IT, I wonder if this laser thing works. Look at that, it does. Lack of skills, always. Always when it's new, comes up to the top. Do I have people who know how to do this? Do I have partners who know how to do this? Can I find some if I really need to get there? Here again, there was a little bit of a difference between those folks and the high readiness folks, but everybody agreed that the answer to the problem was, let's upskill our existing workforce. This stuff is really, really close to what we do and why we do it, and so we really need to understand it. When we add the skills, we're adding the skills to the base of domain knowledge that we want to work with. But we also found that the high readiness folks, having gotten a little farther along than the rest of them, said, well, yeah, we kind of gotten through that. The real problem, money. Not unusual. But in particular, some of the narrative comments made it clear that it wasn't about whether there was enough, it's whether they had planned for enough. It was a budget question. We're not sure we understand just how much it's going to take. And again, one of your strategies has to be, how do I make sure that I contain that question? Ensure that I will have enough in my budget to take care of what I need to do. The next question we asked is, well, how is this going to transform your architecture? Over here on the Pollyanna side of the chart, we're already ready. And no offense, some pieces may already be, but an organization's architecture is not likely to be completely already ready. Well, we're going to migrate some of our architecture to the cloud, and that's going to take care of it. Still apparently a frequent hallucination, to put it in AI terms. Well, we'll overhaul our existing analytics and data science architecture. That's not bad, and it seems to get close to where we perceive the problem to be. Or we're going to overhaul the entire existing data management architecture. Almost certainly a terrible idea, because many of those things underlie our core business processes, and we want to mess with them at our peril. Fortunately, the one that came out at the top, which made me very happy to see, was let's add some AI-specific technology into our existing architecture. And that brings us to the topic that everybody loves to talk about, which is integration. How do we get this new stuff to work with our existing stuff? Most of the existing stuff does what we need it to do. How do we enhance it? So, one intriguing aspect of how that is going to play out is that most of the vendors I'm talking to are building agent technology, not just for your outcomes, but for their own tools. And that raises interesting possibilities about how much of the plumbing work, the mundane stuff that some of your most experienced engineers spend enormous amounts of their time on, can in fact be automated, and let them focus on some things that are more, let's say, valuable to. We asked also about models. Most people are just getting their arms around this notion of an LLM, and a lot of people are still grappling with the idea that there's one. We're going to have an LLM, and now we're ready. No. LLMs are general in nature, and you're going to need one or two of them, but you're also going to need some SLMs. I don't think we're using that one yet. We're going to need some small language models, some highly specific ones that talk about the domain you need them to operate in. And when we ask people, which industry level models are you looking at? Not surprisingly, the ones that showed up the most were money. Everybody's got to figure out how to pay the bills and talk to the IRS. But also, internally, the tools that we will use with the tools. That is, models that are going to help us write code, help us move to a lower or no code environment by making the tools themselves smart, tell them what we want to do, and have them just crank out the code that we used to spend days writing, all the plumbing work. This is encouraging, frankly. But it's important to get this underlying point clear. We will be in a multi-model environment. There will not be one model to rule them all. And this has nothing to do with Mordor. This is just, we need a lot of different pieces of expertise to put together. Finally, and maybe the most important thing that we all have to bear in mind as we get into this journey, is the notion of responsible AI. I'm glad I was at this conference yesterday hearing the discussions here, because it was underlying almost everything I heard yesterday morning. Everybody gets how important it is that we get this right, that we understand, we talked a bunch about this, bias, model bias, about environmental sustainability, about hallucination management. Here's the problem. Those things are all over on the left of this chart. It's not good enough to say, first we'll build it and then we'll figure out if we got these things right. We really need to start there. It needs to inform what we do, and it's great that we're worrying about the internal security of the models or about regulatory compliance because we have no choice. We've got to get that right. But we have to be thinking about this underlying linkage to the ethical perspective of our company and the things that we're trying to get done. So, 20 minutes goes by really fast. Yeah. you need to lay out a course for yourself. It's going to be a winding road. You're going to make some twists and turns. Get the resources lined up. Have your selection criteria for the technology you're going to use clearly in mind. And understand that trusted suppliers whose products you are already familiar with whom you have a trusted relationship, is the best place to go first. I have this need. Can you do this for me? Don't do the bright, shiny object thing. Start with known readiness, a theme of today's presentations, of course. So get involved early, define your objectives, understand how you define success and how you will measure it. Begin with your existing trusted suppliers. Only if they can't do what you need do you need to go looking at the shiny objects that are glistening on the river there. Get your skills in place or supplement them with a trusted services provider. And ensure that you have aligned with your company's perspective on ethics. That's absolutely critical. That's it, right on time. If you'd like to know more about the data here, that was just a handful of charts for a 25-page document. There's a QR code right here. You can download it. Our friends at InterSystems have helped made it available. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you. Would you like a clicker?
I got the clicker. Thanks, Merv. There's a lot of good data there.
Thank you.
Appreciate it and appreciate the freshness of the data. And there's a lot for us to consume. If you could provide like one piece of advice to our folks here today, what would that be?
Get started now. It's time. It's not too late, but it is time to get started. Assess your readiness, and you came to the right place.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks.
Thanks again.